Hey folks, welcome back to Canada's Boxing Channel. I hope everyone's doing well. I'm sad to report that we had snow overnight. Oh, when will it end? And our clocks have changed, so I'm only now 7 hours behind the UK until they change their clocks and I'll go back to being 8 hours behind. So I'm a little bit sort of discombobulated because, I normally wake up at 5:30 and it was 6:30 and I'll be chasing my tail all day. Anyhow, I was going to talk about Kenny Norton today, but yesterday I watched a video and I watched one I think earlier in the week talking about boxing in the 80s and 90s and specifically. And of course everyone's talking about, excuse me please, Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield, Lennox Lewis, and there was just really not much about Riddick Big Daddy Bowe. So I thought, we're not in danger of forgetting Riddick Bowe, are we? Like he was boxing recently. Well, of course, it's not recently. One of the problems is when you get older, you think of the 1990s as being just a few years ago. There's probably people watching this video who were not born when Riddick Bowe was boxing. And so I thought, let's just nip this in the bud. Let's not forget Riddick Bowe. Let's just talk about Riddick Bowe so that people can be reminded of who he was, what he did, and of course we can all look now on YouTube for fights that, unlike trying to look for like Jack Dempsey and Gene Tunney where it's sort of black and white and grainy and poor angles, we can see Riddick Bowe's fights in glorious technicolor, as they used to say, with angles and photography almost as good as we would expect to see, with respect to a modern fight. So, without further ado, let's talk about Riddick Big Daddy Bowe. He was born on August 10th, 1967, I can't read my own handwriting. In Brooklyn, New York, he grew up in the tough Brownsville neighborhood, similar area to that which produced Iron Mike Tyson. And he was the 12th of 13 children, so another big family. His upbringing was marked by hardship and poverty, criminality in the neighborhood, etc. Just like many of the great fighters of the past, those type of environments produced really tough, driven, hard people. He turned to boxing as a way to escape the streets, and he got his start in a police athletic league. Interesting, again, in these very, very poor, crime-ridden inner-city areas, a lot of the great fighters start boxing at police athletic clubs, which is interesting irony, I suppose. And he was guided in those early days by none other than one of the greatest trainers of all time, Eddie Futch, the man who, if you watch my video about the not the five greatest trainers, but about 5 greatest trainers, was one of the fellows who had the key to Muhammad Ali. Eddie Futch figured out how to beat Ali, of course, as Frazier and Kenny Norton proved. Bowe's talent was evident early on, and he had a strong amateur career. His biggest achievement came, of course, in 1988 at the Seoul Olympics when he won the silver medal. And his fellow finalist, the ultimate gold medal winner, was none other than, at that time, Canada's Lennox Lewis. A bit of controversy about the final. The ref stopped the bout in the second round, awarding the victory to Lennox by way of TKO. And a lot of people say that that was a premature stoppage, that, Bowe should have been allowed to continue. If, right? Anyways, that rivalry rears its head later on in Bowe's career, as we'll find out. Bowe finished his amateur career with a record of 104 to 18, and that's an approximate record. There's some dispute about those exact numbers, but it's close enough close enough for government work, as they say. He showed both skill and promise. He had a lot of power, he had speed, he had movement, he had power in abundance, but he was pretty much a complete package. He turns professional in 1989 under the management of Rock Newman and Eddie Futch, and he quickly rose to the heavyweight ranks. His combination of size, he was 6'5" with an 81-inch reach, power and boxing ability made him a formidable contender. As I said, he had it all. He could move, he could box, He had clubbing power, reminiscent actually of the George Foreman of 1971, 72, 73 type power. And he was a vicious finisher. If Riddick Bowe had you in trouble, you stayed in trouble. He wasn't going to ease off the gas pedal. And in some of his knockouts, you will see that the ref is jumping in to pull him off, and Riddick Bowe is not wanting to stop, If Riddick Bowe had had Tyson Fury on Queer Street like Alexander Usyk did in round 9 of their first fight, where, Alexander Usyk has got a punch launched and doesn't deliver it because the ref is hovering there trying to sort of stop it, Riddick Bowe is driving it home. The ref's going to have to physically put his arms around him and pull him back. Very different type of finisher. So on his way up, he defeated several solid heavyweight contenders. Burt Cooper in 1990 stopped Cooper in 2 rounds. Tyrell Biggs, who was also a former Olympic gold medalist, he outclassed and stopped in the 8th round of their 1991 fight. Bruce Seldon, who went on to become a WBA heavyweight champion, he knocked him out in 1 round in 1991. Tony Tubbs, also in 1991, won a very close decision against the former WBA champion. That's what showed that Riddick Bowe wasn't just a slugger, but he could also box and demonstrate, exceptional sort of skills over the distance. A South African fellow, Pierre Cotezer, in 1992, he stopped him in 7 rounds. And that set up a world title shot, which was the beginning of one of the best trilogies in heavyweight boxing. The trilogy with Evander, the real deal Holyfield. Now, Evander Holyfield is on most people's all-time great lists. I'm not sure if he makes my top 10 lifetime, but if not, he's definitely knocking on the door. Evander was, one of the great fighters of his era. The first fight between them occurred on November the 13th, 1992, for the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world. It was a 12-round war. It's the only way to put it, really. Bowe essentially outslugged Holyfield. He dominated in key rounds, and there was a legendary 10th round where they stood toe-to-toe and just fought. Bowe won by unanimous decision, becomes the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. Excuse me. Their second fight on November the 6th, 1993, showed a different Evander Holyfield. Evander had a different strategy. He boxed smarter and he utilized movement. He played to his strengths, essentially. And Bowe was not in the same shape. He had let himself go, and Holyfield won by a majority decision and handed Bowe his first and only professional loss. Now, this fight was marred by one of the most bizarre, weird instances you will see in boxing. A guy, a parachutist, besides being a twat, parachuted into the ring. And if you watched the fight, basically on the top left-hand corner of your TV screen, this guy, parachutist slash twat, lands on the ropes in the corner and gets all tied up. And so the fight's delayed. They call it the fan man incident. A bizarre, weird kind of event that only boxing seems to be able to produce. Also in 1993, Riddick Bowe had a first round KO of Michael Dokes and also beat the British heavyweight Herbie Hyde by KO in round 6. Now, we should talk about an incident that I think we always sort of remember Riddick Bowe for, and it's a bad thing to remember a person by. After he beat Evander in 1992 to become undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, he was supposed to fight Lennox Lewis. But a mixture of financial, contract, backroom, shadiness, shenanigans, however you want to describe it, meant that Riddick Bowe and Lennox Lewis never fought. It's one of the tragedies, actually, of boxing. I don't know who's to blame. It's one of those sort of, people point the fingers at each other. But the fact of the matter is, There was a lot of hype, a lot of expectation. Remember, these two had fought in the final of the 1988 Seoul Olympics. They were supposed to fight. It would have been a great fight, I'm absolutely certain. They never fought, and the image we keep in our minds of Riddick Bowe is he held out the WBC belt and he dropped it in a trash can. It's unfair in many respects that that's how we remember Riddick Bowe. But the facts are the facts, and that's what captured the public's imagination. Now, of course, today, we look at Lennox Lewis as an all-time great. He's certainly on my top 10 lifetime, and he's near the top. Whereas Riddick Bowe, most people, like I say, sort of almost airbrush him out of the era, particularly casual fans. So to the victor go the spoils, as they say. But it's an unfortunate way to remember Riddick Bowe. And they, like I say, they never did fight. We don't know who was the better. The record books show that Lennox beat Riddick in the 1988 Olympic finals. They never met professionally. We will never know. I would say it's a bit like Fury and AJ, but to use Fury's name and AJ's name in the same sentence as Lennox Lewis and Riddick Bowe does seem off to my way of thinking. The third fight between Riddick Bowe and Evander Holyfield occurred on November the 4th, 1995. That was Bowe's last, I will say, really significant fight. We'll get to some others, but that was his last hurrah, as they say. Holyfield knocked Bowe down in the 6th round, but Bowe came back to stop him in the 8th. So he wins the trilogy against an all-time great, Evander the Real Deal Holyfield, 2-1. Is it the greatest trilogy in boxing history? No. It doesn't rise to the level of Ali Frazier. It's comparable in my book to Ali Norton. And please, let us not make comparisons to Fury Chisora, which really belong in a different category of trilogies. After the trilogy with Holyfield, Bowe went on to fight Polish heavyweight Andrew Golota twice in 1996. These are fights I very clearly remember. Both fights end in disqualification losses for Golota due to repeated low blows. Now, we're not talking of a low blow like Daniel Dubois hitting Alexander Usyk. We're talking of somebody who punches a guy directly in the nuts. Like, it's the strangest thing. Golota was winning. The first fight, July the 11th, 1996, Golota is dominating much of the fight. It's hard to sort of see that there's going to be any outcome other than a Golota victory. But he's disqualified in the 7th round for repeated low blows. And like I say, if you haven't seen the fight, there's no question. It's like there was a bullseye target on Riddick Bowe's balls, and Golota was just going for them, which is testament not only to Riddick Bowe's chin, but to his iron testicular strength. After that fight, there was like a riot. Riot is the wrong word. There was chaos. There was violence. There was a chaotic scene in Madison Square Garden. Again, one should go and look for these things. They had a rematch, December the 14th, 1996. And again, Golota's winning. There is no doubt that Golota's going to win this fight. But, once again, the flashing neon sign on Bowe's balls attracted Golota, who punched them. 9th round, disqualification. Now, Bowe looked very sluggish in this fight, and it was quite clear, actually I think in both fights, that Bowe was past his best. And these fights definitely took what was left out of Bowe, and he retired from boxing shortly thereafter. He did make a comeback in 2004. He had a win in 2004 and a win in 2005. He then called it a day again. He came back in 2008 and had one win, but that was it. He also experimented with a little bit of kickboxing and also pro wrestling. Now, Bowe's life then took a bizarre turn. He, in 1998, kidnapped, I was going to say his ex-wife. I don't think she was actually his ex-wife, but she was estranged from him. So they'd separated. He kidnapped his spouse, still legally spouse, but separated spouse, and their kids. And he was eventually arrested, charged, and convicted for that offense, and he served 17 months in prison. So there we go. Riddick Bowe is still with us. He remains, I think, one of the most talented heavyweights of his era, but he never fully capitalized on that potential. It's like he did everything right, and he won the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world, and then everything seemed to sort of go off the rails. He never got to fight Lennox Lewis, and his dropping of the belt into the trash can, his fights with Golota, they sort of tarnish the whole picture. I do think we should remember Riddick Bowe as being, if not an all-time great, one of the very best of his era. We shouldn't forget him. It would be a tragedy if we were to do so. We remember Iron Mike Tyson of the 80s, the less Iron Mike of the 90s. We justly remember Lennox Lewis, and we ought to not forget Riddick Bowe. You know, in some ways, he kind of reminds me of Kenny Norton, who I was going to talk about today. Because, you know, when we talk about the 70s, we sort of almost falls from our lips. Ali, Frazier, Foreman, Ali, Foreman, Frazier. And then there's Norton. And of course, in the 1990s, we sort of about, you know, Lewis, Holyfield, Tyson, Tyson, Lewis, Holyfield. And we forget about Big Daddy Bowe. Let's not forget. He was a great fighter. He beat virtually every top talent on the way up. And he has a record of 43-1. There was one no contest. It's a great record to have. It's a tragedy that he didn't fight Lennox Lewis. A much greater tragedy than, you know, some other missed fights. But it is what it is. Let's remember him for being a great champion, a guy who had a foreshortened career, a guy who also had, you know, testicles of steel, because he didn't get killed by Golota's repeated low blows. Okay, on that little bit of humor, I'll end this. Please like, please share, please subscribe, and most importantly, have a fabulous day. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.